I think we've got everybody online now. So again, good morning from a wet and slightly cooler for the time of year Istanbul. We're now having our third British Chamber of Commerce Turkey webinar. We've got over 100 participants registered for today's event from both Turkey and UK. So we're looking forward to a very productive discussion, and hopefully we'll have some questions coming through later on. You will be able to ask questions as we go through the presentations, and we will get round to answering those as we go forward. We're now in the 7th week of lockdown in Turkey. There has been quite a strong regime of lockdown. We've just come through a 3-day curfew where nobody's been allowed out, and apart from medical and other essential businesses, all businesses have been closed. So we, like everybody else, are suffering from the consequences and effects of the coronavirus. As you probably well know, we have a very strong trading relationship, UK and Turkey. The bilateral value is currently around £18 billion, so it's a very important market for both countries, which we wish to continue and we wish to build on as we go forward. And with the current pandemic, we are doing our best to make sure that communication channels are open, that both UK companies who are currently doing business in Turkey or looking to do business in Turkey are staying well informed as to what is currently going on here. I mean, today's webinar will look at how the effects of the virus or what effects the virus will have on businesses going forward. We want to look at both the risks and also the benefits as we come out of this epidemic. So as we go forward, we're going to be presented, or our presenters from Deloitte, our member organization. We'll have Ali Bey, who's going to talk to us. We're going to have Sinan Bey, both partners in Deloitte. They've got some very detailed information and presentations to make, which I'm sure will update you on the current situation here, and also be highlighting opportunities and potential as we go forward. There is a movement at the moment and lots of discussion going on about the role of Turkey in the future. There is reservations now about doing business with China and Southeast Asia, and if companies start to restructure their supply chains and are looking for countries that can provide products and services closer to home, then Turkey probably has a role to play in that, and that's something we'll probably touch on as we go through the various presentations. So with no more ado, I want to hand over to Ali Bey, who's going to take us through his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Hello, everyone. I've been working for Deloitte for 21 years. I'm one of the partners of the firm, and I'm in charge of Deloitte Private and Family Businesses Group as well. So today we will be speaking about the agenda of the C-level executives of SMEs and family businesses and some mid-sized companies regarding the COVID-19 crisis, and the risks and opportunities, how the Turkish businesses are affected. And we would like to be again talking about some opportunities for the international investors going forward, what the current environment is, and how we can more work on building up business together. So I will start, and I will then hand over the word to Sinan, who will talk about the supply chain. And in order to leave enough time for the questions, we will be going through the slides quite briefly and elaborate over the questions. Next slide, please. So our agenda is how sectors respond to the new normal, moving forward, how SMEs and family businesses confront the new normal. And we will be also talking about the tomorrow's checklist. Next slide. So, right, everybody's talking about the new normal. However, everybody's trying to make a definition of the new normal, and it's not that clear for all businesses. But it's obvious that the new environment is challenging us and forcing us to take another look at the processes and how we are doing the things. And it creates some sort of priorities and some sort of urgencies in the business environment. And when we analyze the popular urgencies, prioritize items in the C-levels of the SMEs and family businesses and mid-sized entities in Turkey, it drops down, it is summarized under 4 main pillars. The first one is obviously the liquidity and finance. The second one is governance and risk issues which arises from remote working environment primarily, and like paid leaves, like managing of the workforce. And thirdly, another very important item on the agenda of the companies is the digital customer and digitalization of the processes and the marketing channels. And lastly, which is more interesting and which is more of interest to our participants over here, supply chain. So next slide, please. Please, next slide. So let's take a look at the Turkish economy very quick. Those are the 2019 country snapshot. I won't be reading all these numbers, but I would like to have your attention on the right side of the slide. So our reports and our researches shows us like 3 different cases. And the question is, what if the pandemic lasts longer than we are ready for, or how it's going to be affected? What are the best cases and worst cases scenarios? When we take a look at the global economy, we read, and based on the different resources, we think that economic recovery will begin in late 2021, and recovery will be slow in early 2022, and it will speed up in the second half of 2022. Global recovery will start in the second half of 2021, and global GDP will reduce by 3% in 2021, and fiscal stimulus will limit the business failures, but does not boost spending. So when we take a look at the other strong economies, the United States maybe GDP may shrink at 8%, European Union may shrink at 8%, China will remain almost stable, 1% growth, and Japan economy will be 3% shrinking. What does it mean for Turkey? Turkey is exporting goods to Europe, and for the mild case, COVID-19 impact, Turkish economy will remain like 0.6, will remain stable. In the harsh case, our economy will shrink 4.1%, and in the severe case, it may shrink up to 8%. So this is quite a bit of slowdown, and unemployment rates also may increase while we are recovering from the COVID-19 impact. Go ahead, please. And next slide. So let's take a look at the industry outlook, how the industries are impacted in Turkey. And I will start with the right side of the slide. Hopefully you all can follow that. The first bullet is industrial production value added annual percentage change on the right side, which is the black part. The Eurozone industrial production will decrease 2.8 And in developed countries, it will like 2.5% decrease. And in emerging markets, it will drop down 1%. And the second slide indicates the oil prices. So as you may have already followed, in the last weeks, oil prices were negative, which means, per se, you have 100 tons of oil on hand. When you deduct the stocking fees and the delivery costs, you make loss. It doesn't have a value, and this is the very first time that oil prices were negative. And merchandise trade volume and Dow Jones Global Shipping Index is also deteriorating, which we can expect in under the circumstances. So therefore, it has an impact on the Turkish economy, obviously, and the petroleum and gas industry is expected to perform lower in the following year, and energy industry will not perform because the industrial production will be underperforming. Transportation and automotive is also expected to underperform. For the automotive, there is a depressed demand, so we will be following up how it will recover in 2021. It may be improving going forward. But for accommodation and services, we are expecting a downturn again in the following summer months. But Turkish, one of the main industries in Turkey is construction, and most of the bigger contractor firms do business in the Middle East. Since the oil prices are going down, we may expect less spending of those countries in construction and real estate. So the construction business will be affected from this oil prices downturn as well. And retail and electronic is also have decreasing financial performance nowadays. Not a very optimistic scenario, but this is based on the numbers. The COVID-19 is impacting the Turkish economy and impacting many industries, which are the main industries in Turkey. Next slide, please. So, however, we see some businesses which are not affected or even improved their performance. And when we take a look at the common practices of those companies, it's again can be summarized under 4 pillars. The 4 critical common features of companies who manage this crisis better than the others are, firstly, effective cash management. As always, we see in the crisis times, cash is the king and the queen nowadays. So companies with stronger capital structure and who has liquidity levels higher and who has strong credit lines from the financing institutions are more successful managing the crisis and even creating opportunities out of it. The second one is the digitalization investments. So the companies who have invested in digital transformation and online channels are performing better in this crisis. Digital transformation in the scope of working remotely, like digitalization of the processes, and it's also it includes the digital marketing channels, which is more important, where we will be speaking in more detail. But thirdly, the supply chain, where Sinan will be talking about, is another success item to manage the risk, like not unconcentrated supply chain processes, visibility across the supply chain, reduce the supply chain risks are key items that we should be focusing on under the circumstances. And the flexible organizations in terms of cost structures, staff costs, and other costs is also, again, another very critical factor for success under these circumstances. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about how SMEs and family businesses confront the new normal. Next slide. So, well, going forward, we see that outbreaks occurred in the world before COVID-19, and it will continue to occur going forward. So, those kind of crises should be accepted by the business community, that the organizations should be ready for such kind of similar crises going forward. And in order to be resilient, there are 4 categories that companies should take an action. The first one is the liquidity and finance. Obviously, as we have spoken in the previous slide, accurate financial modeling, liquidity management, strong credit lines, sensitivity analysis and stress scenarios. Worst case scenarios are key to success going forward, and organizations should conduct rolling forecast, and they should be following on a more shorter interval the financial performance and the budget actual realization. But from the governance and risk perspective, remote working also increases some risks, which are data privacy, cybersecurity issues, and other legal risks associated with the employee contracts and other contracts with the suppliers. Thirdly, the digital customer. Digital customer is so important, digital marketing channels. And lastly, supply chain investment, supply chain risk management, business continuity strategies are things that the companies, SMEs and family businesses should consider. Next slide, please. Well, in these times, the companies should not only focus on maintaining the top line performance, revenue levels, but also the bottom line performance. Profitability is also very strategic. The company should target the pocket margin by understanding pricing strategy and cut out any complexity in the supply chain. So cost control, effective pricing strategy, and margin control, focusing on the profitability and protecting the main sources, main revenue sources is critically important. Next slide. So we'll take a look at under those first. Let's make it a little bit more granular and tangible. For the liquidity and finance, we may expect 4 disruption risks. The first one is widespread liquidity shortage, which is very important. There may be some delays in payment terms and in collection terms, and there may be some difficulties in cost control, and changing the credit terms and is also an expected disruption in the marketplace. So in order to cope with these, that all companies should execute scenario planning to better understand how much cash will be needed for such periods, implement cash conservation and recovery actions, rapidly optimize working capital and evaluate credit solutions, and negotiate more flexible financing terms with the financing institutions, and implement cash strategies and leverage government incentives. For example, government incentives are very important to follow up. There are various government incentives nowadays, which SMEs and family businesses and other businesses can benefit from for the time being, and focus on cost control to maintain business continuity is another key to manage the liquidity and finance. Next slide, please. For the governance and risk, I won't repeat myself. Let me go over the slide very quickly. The main expected disruptions are increased remote working, constant emergency mode, rapid legislation changes, which is very critical, and increased data breach, cybersecurity, and data privacy issues may rise up. So in order to manage these, like the companies may invest in more cybersecurity measures and remote more working, develop action plans to counteract constant legislation changes, understand the impacts on contractual obligations, adopt above-the-bar regulatory and governance controls are other action items. Next slide, please. Before handing over to Sinan, digital customer is very important nowadays. People are at home and they are still spending, although their spending is decreasing. On the right side of the slide, there is an interesting statistics that you may see. One of our researchers showed that 23 of the participants experienced a decrease between 25% to 50%, and 54% of the participants experienced a decrease more than 50% on the loss of revenues. The impact is much severe on small businesses that employs less than 50 people, and as more than 60% of small businesses reported that their revenue decreased by more than 50%. So this is severe shrinking in the marketplace. However, we see some companies who are working in who are increasing their revenues, mostly in the digital marketing channels or like online marketing, and some delivery companies are also improving their businesses. So Sinan, would you like to take over to talk about the supply chain and what companies do going forward?
Yes, thank you, Ali. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. And first of all, hope you are all doing well and staying safe and healthy. This is Sinan Ergil, working for Deloitte as a senior manager. And my major area of expertise is supply chain and network operations with more than 10 years of experience. Today, I'm backing up Gökay Özdemir, my partner at Deloitte. Hopefully, he will be joining our conversation soon. And before I start to present the supply chain part of the deck, I want you to think for 1 second only. While you have limited ability to interact like COVID-19 restrictions right now, what you need is like either serve digitally or by supply chains. Isn't it true? So like I can say, supply chain is never ever important and essential to businesses and humanity as it is right now. In addition, I need to emphasize that the time of this webinar is excellent, since we have just shooted a survey last week to figure out the supply chain disruption levels and recovery abilities by sectors for especially the post-epidemic periods. And survey has been mostly reacted by the C-level attendees in a big majority, almost in all sectors. So today, I will be firstly trying to explain the disruption levels of COVID-19 and key suggestions for responding and recovery of supply chains, and then we'll continue a little bit with sector insights, opportunities and threats for also UK Turkish trade ecosystem supported with the survey pre-results. So as my colleague explained earlier, who have digitalized the business or have a strong cash positioning and have a flexible organizations and are prepared the supply chain and distribution network for the risk environment are stronger today and will be stronger tomorrow. So as a perfect readiness example, we can say technology, software and telecommunication sectors are almost enjoying this crisis. So also global market chains, food or essential good delivery startups, healthcare sector, marketplaces had to react very fast to cover huge interaction increases to their companies. So there are and will be winners and losers in short and medium terms, also in the long run. So This epidemic crisis is back-to-back, affecting every link of supply chain, and end-to-end supply chain is strong as is the weakest link. So customers are demanding more, but uncertainly, to satisfy their needs or their customer needs with more pressure than ever. To underline it again, it's back-to-back and not organized. So firms should consider its impact on the end-to-end supply chain, starting from product development to delivery. On the right-hand side, you can see a survey result for B4G survey, like 82% of the participants expect really serious disruption in supply chain. And as a majority of small firms will face substantial challenges in the demand planning, raw material sourcing, and delivering their products. So moreover, the continuing the ambiguity in the demand will trigger the bullwhip effect, which is like fake, which will augment the disruptive nature of supply chain shocks even more for the middle firms through the value chain. As it is said at a first glance, demand shifts and fluctuations complicates forecasting and related action taking, so the business plans. And this uncertainty causes like big disruptions almost in all sectors. Companies have to respond with more dynamic sales and operation planning with several detailed the high demand fluctuation, disability, and poor market situations, the roadblocks that barriers the border trades, and or in-city restriction disrupting the logistic networks and importing raw material. These dimensions of disruption are very strong and may vary or differ by sectors. Just try to imagine those in the global logistic network includes more of these dimensions. This requires like even more agility in supply chain operations and visibility through the value chain. To overcome all of these obstacles, first thing will be the responding right to the situations. Like our suggestions would be, as you can see in the slide, like setting up a dynamic sales and operation planning processes to be prepared for the demand shifts and requests, securing logistic capacity, considering alternative route plans and modes to and from the impacted areas, following up governmental supports and incentives, as Ali said, and enhancing dynamic inventory deployment capabilities and focusing on demand management, and focusing on controlling stock levels and redefining the alternative supply channels and redefining the essential needs. Also, maybe the redesigning the value chain to better plan and demand inventory. Also, prioritizing and serving better for the most loyal and important customer is very important. And of course, for the financial continuity, analyzing the profitability, demanding trends and operational complexity of products at the most practical level will be very essential. So all these responses and detailed work scenario-based action plans will enlighten the way to recovery of end-to-end supply chain and even let companies to override the redefinition of the new supply chain principles. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. As I informed, I want to continue with the Deloitte Supply Chain Survey pre-results with sector insights and also try to connect with opportunities and threats for UK and Turkish trade ecosystem. If we highlight the UK-Turkey foreign trade numbers, UK has the second place after Germany for export value in 2019. And also, in terms of export value, Turkey is almost like 7% of China, but growing. As an additional note, I want to add, at 2019, foreign trade of Turkey made a record contribution with 4.7 points to the country's growth, the largest contribution seen in last 18 years in Turkey. For your records also, last 18 years, UK made more than $10 billion investment to Turkey. So nothing is a coincidence. I want to explain also the disruption in the global manufacturing markets, especially in China. Epidemic presents a significant opportunity for Turkish manufacturers to gain a market share, since weaker local currency makes its exports relatively less expensive for international buyers. Also, young and capable workforce of Turkey cannot be overlooked. And in addition, Turkish government, Minister of Foreign Trade, declared supporting exporters to UK market as in a targeted period, 2020 and 2021, and incentives are very clear. Now, after understanding the value and high potential of Turkey-UK trading, let's proceed with the supply chain disruption and recovery insight by sectors. I want to begin with the first group as a technology, software, and telecommunication sector, which we can clearly say that they have the strongest financial positioning and still forecasting growth this year. And also most ready to transform remote workforce, and also with the capable organizations, and best reacted to epidemic in general and with digitalization, and most capable to supply chain recovery. With pointing this insight, technology, software, and for telecommunication sectors, I want to also possible to enlarge the group with like high-tech startup labs, biotechnology, and pharma sectors. This group of sectors can be defined as a high-value return opportunity to invest. Also, as per the latest declaration of government, which is eager to invest and develop those sectors with support and incentives, this chance should be benefited even to overcome the transportation barriers at the borders. In addition to financial incentives, Turkish government is declared very new that like the export for the medical equipment restriction will be eased. So it comes as a clear business opportunity for Turkish healthcare manufacturing to accelerate the production of, for example, the ventilators or high-end intensive care unit equipments. Also, as a second group of sectors from the survey, including the FMCG, consumer and retail, first thing to say is like HoReCa Kanal, the hotel, restaurant, and cafe channel, and retail chains at the shopping malls are having hard times due to the closure and restrictions, and even like some of the firms cannot evaluate the alternative scenarios for the demand shift due to uncertain opening timeline. Big players in FMCG and global market chains investing for delivery logistics, scenario-based strategic sourcing, alternative supply channels, and for recovering the demand shift problems. Also, like all sectors, governmental workforce incentives are benefited for remote working employees in this second group. As a third big group of survey, manufacturers and we can say industrial goods, having financial stress, as Ali said, and financial stress issue comes in the first page, since the most traditional trade dynamics are disrupted and all ecosystem is negatively affected. And threats like transportation limitations and interdependency to imported raw material, directing all sectors to local production investments. And in this phase of opportunity for investment with incentives of government, of course, will be very essential to recovery. But it also a sense of agile need to fulfilling the blanks of China exports. The international investment for sourcing continuity will be injected to the system, we believe this. So young capable workforce also for manufacturing and production will be very attractive for decreasing the decreased value of local currency for international investors. Almost summing up, the survey gives us a signal that the strongest survivor sectors to grow or to be invested after COVID will be possible like this by order. Like in the first row, we can say the agriculture, healthcare, and medical with food and packaging. And in the secondly, we can say like warehousing, logistics, e-trade, telecom technology, and defense sectors. As a summary outcome, although there are obstacles to overcome, Turkey is performing well other than the currency management, and Turkish market is positioning itself to be a huge manufacturing hub for EU with the Turkish government incentives, with eager to invest international investors for their sourcing continuity, and with proximity advantage to EU market, and with eager to produce and develop with capable and young workforce, which is relatively less expensive. And lastly, I can say the dynamic greenfield investment infrastructure opportunity for strategic moves. Next slide, please. We have prepared a checklist for tomorrow and also an action plan, show how to respond and recover and thrive this complex situation with time. Let's move to the checklist. Our checklist is like a pill to kick off. You should check the working capital to understand the account payables, receivables, and inventory in detail. Secondly, cost should be controlled with detailed measures, and you should have a detailed view on the short-term operating expenses and also in the mid-term. And accounts receivables insurance is very essential. Also, government incentives and stimulus aids is very important in the fourth step, and the prioritizing cash flow and profitability will follow as the fourth, and communication plan with your customers, with your workforce is very important also. Let's jump to the next slide. Thank you. As an action plan, we have a like 3-step action plan. As I told before, the first step is responding the situation and with scenario-based responses. And the second step will be recovering the pain, and the third step will be thriving. So as long as we are forecasting, the first step would take like 1 to 12 weeks, which if we think that we are in the 7th week, we have more time to manage this preparation and managing the continuity. And also second step recovery will take like 24 weeks, and thriving will be after 36 weeks. So in the first responding step, the key activities would be like implementing the cash conversation, understanding the impacts very well, analyzing your profitability and positioning. Also, identifying the demand and supply. It's very hard, I know, but anyway, we should do this. And to like immediate decision points, we can say like the government incentives should be checked, and insurances, accounts receivables should be checked, and customer and production line should be checked. And in the second step, as a key activity, ensuring the internal audit and resources, and also focusing on profitable customers, key activity, and also developing a sales and operation plan and monitoring it very clearly and closely would be very essential. Also, for the thriving step, identifying the major shifts and determining the major disruptions will be very important. Also, as an immediate decision point, we should understand the need, understand the need very well, and understand how we will generate the value to our customer in the new normal. I think this is the end of my part, and I thank you all for listening and giving the control to my colleague.
Thank you, Sinan. Thank you, Ali Bey and Sinan. That very informative. A lot of information there, but the slides will be available to everyone on completion of the webinar. So anybody that requires the slides, please let us know. Just a couple of points. We have quite a number of UK companies on the webinar, and I'm sure there will be some questions that they'll be asking. But and when it comes to supply chain, there are issues at the moment with logistics and transport and transportation. I mean, we've seen enormous increases in air freight, because air freight is probably one of the only reliable ways of getting goods around the world at the moment. cargo companies involved in air freight are pretty much fully booked. There's very little opportunity, and going to SMEs, it's probably not available to SMEs because of the expense. I mean, one thing that we're hearing, and we've got examples of that, is the difficulty of road transport, and particularly transit drivers getting visas in order to cross borders. And I'm sure UK companies would be interested to know, how we can overcome issues like that. It may not be a problem specifically for business. It could be more of a problem for government and visa sections. But any advice there on how we can circumvent some of these issues? And just a quick one for Ali. I'm giving you one as well in terms of liquidity, particularly for SMEs. I mean, we've heard from UK, particularly over the last week or so, about the enormous losses that UK banks have suffered in the first quarter. And it just worries me that, when it comes to having access to funding and, the importance of liquidity for SMEs, whether SMEs will be at the back of the queue, given that banks are currently experiencing difficulty and will continue as long as the pandemic is causing problems. So if you've just got a few words on that.
Yeah, but the situation is similar in Turkey, Chris. So the more optimistic scenario about the unemployment rate will be 15 to 17% going down the road in Turkey, which will be increasing. And the family businesses, SMEs and mid-sized entities accounts for almost 95% of the whole economy in Turkey. So given the economic conditions and all the industries and oil prices that we have spoken about, in Turkey we will be seeing more SMEs, mid-sized entities, hungry for cheaper financing going forward. And this will obviously impact the non-performing loan ratio, NPL, of the Turkish banks. We haven't started to see the severe impact on the financial statements yet. However, we are expecting additional NPL reserves in the financial statements of the banks and a lower performance of the finance FSI industry as a whole.
Okay.
Regarding the first question of transportation, according to our researches, like transportation companies are working on to drive with non-stop, with like multiple drivers, and trying to make the transportation to EU easier with like having a conversation with customs in EU, but it's not clearly it's not clear yet. The results are not clear yet, but like transportation companies for the land transport, I mean, are trying to find a solution for non-stop, like multi-driver solution.
Okay, so
the borders without stopping.
Yeah, I mean that's something. And any questions from our UK companies on any problems that they're experiencing, I mean, please submit those as questions, and we'll see if we can get answers to them. I mean, just a couple of other points on what are the next steps. I think one thing that everybody's learning from this pandemic is to have an active and viable crisis management policy within their organizations, and even SMEs should also have a crisis management policy that they've got in place, ready to activate as and when necessary. just something that I think everybody needs to be aware of, because I think one of the consequences of this pandemic has shown that companies don't have a crisis management policy that has been updated or is ready to deal with future global crises as we have today. And I think that's going to be critically important. And I would include some governments don't have a crisis management program and policy in place as well. I mean, these are all issues that we've got to get to the bottom of, and obviously, we look to Deloitte to give us some guidance on that. One other point that I'd just like to bring into play is that Turkey, both as a domestic market, is offering great potential and has offered great potential over the last few years in terms of its growth, but it's also becoming quite a regional hub in terms of its investments into into North Africa, the Middle East, into Central Asia, into Russia. So there are many opportunities there once we get through this pandemic for UK companies to penetrate those markets as well through Turkish organisations. And if there are any UK companies interested in understanding more about that, we're quite happy to supply information on it. A few points there just to stimulate the Q&A. Can I hand over to the Q&A and see what questions we have?
Hi, thank you very much indeed for the brief presentation and about supply chain and all these important subjects. So may I ask audience to raise their question on the Q&A tab, or you can raise your hand and I can give you, authorization to speak. We have a question from Özgün Önal. If you compare the type of transportation models of transportation by road, by sea or air, how would you comment from this point of easiness and usability? Which way is more usable in a short way of question? Maybe Sinan Bey to you.
Of course, the air freight, air freight nowadays is the easiest way to transport the items to the destination, but as Chris said, it's quite expensive, and all the slots are already blocked or reserved for the early action takers, let's say, or big accounts. I believe that the road transportation we will find a solution very soon with multiple driver, as I told you, as I told before, multiple driver and non-stop and like touchless solutions. It has to, by the way, and also the marine transportation, the containers, in a midterm period, it will be a effective way to transport the items.
Thank you. Another question from Hüseyin Çınar. How do you assess the supply chain from the side of sea trade? Seaport restrictions, crew changes, closing borders, etc., could be disrupted in near future in the sea trade. So, what do you think about, sea shipments and transportation?
Actually, as long as we could follow up in the first month, the sea trade is not affected very much due to the early loadings. But after the mid-April, we see disruptions in also the marine trade, the ports, I mean the customs. But I think the governments and customs, and also the countries, the customs officer and the country trade, foreign trade responsibles, we will figure out some solutions. So this we are waiting to announce the confirmed race, but until this today, we don't heard like a very confirmed solution for this.
Thank you. Ali Bey, maybe this question to you from Tim Bright. How do you estimate the likelihood of the different cases for Turkey, mid-harsh or severe? outcomes right after the outbreak finishes, or?
It's a difficult question to see. There are a lot of uncertainties, but in my opinion, we will be shrinking at least 5%. I'm expecting between 5 to 7, but this is my personal view, and I'm building this up based on what I read, what I follow up, and based on the expectations of the international organizations. So it's very difficult, but this is what I am expecting.
Chris, can we have your thoughts on this?
Well, yes. I mean, everybody's second guessing at the moment as to how long the pandemic's going to last. When lockdown will be eased to allow business to start moving again, and that applies not just to Turkey and UK. It applies to all countries that are affected. So it's difficult to gauge just what the effect will be on economies, and as far as I can see, some of the numbers that are being mentioned, and Ali Bey's 5%, I think, is a reasonable number to predict. But the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to get, and it depends what liquidity there is in markets, both in the UK and Turkey, to sustain a longer period of lockdown. I mean, we're coming up now to the tourist season as we get into May, and it's difficult to see how Turkey can get back into its tourist mode. I mean, given that currently we're still going to have some lockdowns here in Turkey, probably through to the end of May and into June. So Turkey's obviously going to have to find a way of dealing with the lack of tourists that we're going to have. And as far as UK is concerned, again, social distancing and staged easing on lockdowns in UK are going to continue again through the summer. So it depends, how much can be provided by government stimulus and the banking sector to keep the economy moving forward. Everybody's going to see quite considerable deficits on their economy. How much they'll be, I think it's beyond my pay grade to actually guess that, but it's going to be very difficult for everybody.
Thank you, Chris. Just going over the question once again. So we have a question from Prince Dikari. So how comparable is the land freight cost from Turkey to UK compared to China to the UK by the sea? So basic comparison between transportation costs, Turkey to UK and Turkey to China by sea or by land freight. Sinan Bey, do you have any?
Actually, it's really hard to answer this question right now.
You're specifically expert on logistic and custom brokerage, etc. But just a question, but we can take this Prince's question to offline, and we may try to give an answer by using some of our custom and brokerage companies to respond to that question, just to give a Prince a quick idea.
Can I come in there, Emre? Just on that, I mean, there has been some work done on these cost comparisons, and I mean, I'll just add this to it, and we can take it offline. But it's not just a question of cost; it's also a question of flexibility, and you've also got to look at the benefits in terms of lead times, and you've also got to look at the quality of product from each market. I mean, we know that China has been geared up for mass production with long production runs. Lead times are also long, so you've got to allocate a cost to all that. Whereas, if you come to Turkey, you've got shorter lead times. In some sectors, you've probably got better quality, more flexibility. and greater capability. So these factors have to be blended into any cost evaluation that you may be looking at.
Thank you. I'll speed up a little bit. We have a couple more questions. Question from Richard Smith to everybody, whoever would like to respond. It's a long question. Regarding operating within the current restriction in Turkey, do you have any examples of how companies are managing successfully still doing their business? As an example, distributor of UK products, visiting manufacturer for maintenance of these systems, installation of new systems during any current downtime in production. As an example, by operating within hygiene restriction and visiting customers outside of normal hours, etc. Chris, do you have a word on this?
Well, well, yes. Again, yeah, there have been restrictions. I think the only sector that's been doing particularly well are companies that are providing PPE equipment and clothing. Turkey's obviously had the capacity and the capability to provide substantial amounts of PPE, which is quite a large consignments come to UK. So those businesses are doing particularly well. But I mean, looking at the way that restrictions on the way people are shopping in Turkey. I mean, obviously the retailers are doing quite well. There is home delivery and online services available, and they're quite efficient. So that supply chain in terms of essential commodities is working quite well. And so as far as digital and online access in Turkey, it's doing quite well. And I think for the future, we'll be looking at a different way of people doing their shopping. I mean, we're in a situation now where people who've never gone online to shop or never gone online to purchase groceries and have them delivered to home have now had to do that. And from what we hear, and it's mostly anecdotal, is that people have been very happy with that way of shopping. And there's going to be a large percentage of people who probably will not go back to what has been the traditional way of shopping, in stores and so on. And for other items that are deemed essential, again, people have gone online who previously didn't go online and found the service extremely good, and the quality of the products online sort of equal to what they would have chosen if they'd gone to a shop. So there'll be lots of ongoing changes in terms of when we get through this as to way people do shop, and a lot of their habits and traditional ways of shopping, I think, will change.
Thank you very much. I'll have two more questions and then take the rest of the questions offline. We're running out of time in here. Obviously, another question for tourism industry, which is the significant industry for Turkey and triggers lots of other sectors in Turkey, like HoReCa, food and drink, transportation, shopping, luxury market, etc. So Tim Bright is asking, what about the expectation for domestic tourism within Turkey? Ali Bey, maybe you may want to have a word about tourism industry, because Turkey is obviously relying on tourism and lots of GDP. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, over 9 to 10% of GDP is coming from tourism industry.
Yeah, well, we have issued a detailed report about the expectation of tourism industry, expectations of C-level executives of the tourism industry. It can be found at our website, or if this gentleman emails me, I will be more than happy to share it with him or her. So the tourism industry will be definitely underperforming this summer. It's a very strategic industry for us. However, the interesting thing is the expectation is the recovery will be faster than expected. So I know that this answer is quite gray. However, what we are seeing in the marketplace is this summer the tourism industry will be going down. However, going forward, the recovery, the expectation is the recovery will be faster than the other European countries.
Thank you. A question from Lev Denker, one of our close colleagues from DIT in the UK. So he's specifically asking for how Turkish Airlines and the new Istanbul airport are faring during this difficult time. There has been lots of heavy investment by boats, and how are they going to be able to service these loans? Do they need to make major cutbacks, and will be the effect of those in long term? I mean, we can take this question into Turkey's public projects like PPP projects. Government has paid lots of money and loans, granted some loans in order to build those PPP projects. And obviously this outbreak is affecting those PPPs as well, apart from healthcare industry, like the bridges, new airport, etc. So how can we respond, how government is going to respond that, because most of taxpayers are not capable of paying their taxes, and government is unable to pay these loans probably in long term. So will there be, effect on small and medium businesses in Turkey as well, in terms of macroeconomics?
Is it anybody going to?
Was it a hard question? Nobody's responding.
Who's going to have a stab at that one? I mean, thank you, Lev, as usual. A very good question, but a difficult answer if there are answers to it. I mean, we can only speak anecdotally about the new airport. I mean, obviously, like all airports around the world, they're working to sort of high single-digit capacity, I suppose, and the only traffic that's really doing well is air freight, and Turkish Airlines, because of its global network, in terms of air freight, is working beyond its capacity. I think this is the information we're getting from our contacts within aviation. Yeah, I mean, British Airways and Heathrow airports, they're all predicting a major downturn in passenger traffic, at least for a year or so, once we get through this pandemic. So yeah, I mean, any country that's invested heavily in expansion of their airports is obviously going to have a problem, and until the level of traffic that they forecast actually starts to come back again. So it will be an ongoing issue. It depends how the governments can deal with that in terms of any stimulus to the airline and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. Maybe we can take it offline as well, and any other inputs that we can add, we'll forward to you.
Thank you, Chris. I think we should get a couple more questions, because I have too many on my list right now, with the permit of my speakers in here. An anonymous attendee is asking a question about HoReCa industry. Will there be any aid or government injection given to the HoReCa industry and retail industry? Much like in the UK, there is a furlough schemes and injections for smaller bricks and mortar stores. So we can take this question broader, I think. Ali Bey, what do you think about which industries should have some, aid or government injections in this period, or government is taking, any actions and doing the right things properly?
Okay. Well, when we take a look at the most impacted industries, definitely the services, tourism, and HoReCa industry employs significant number of people in Turkey. So therefore, in the short term, in order to control the unemployment rate and keep those businesses up and running, I think that will be a strategic and right move to support these industries. And going forward, given the shrink in the markets, in European markets, the exports should decrease. We may expect it decrease in the export levels. So given the oil prices, the industrial products and manufacturing may be benefiting from the lower oil prices. However, the construction industry, energy industry, services, retail and consumer goods, those are all industries which will be underperforming. And another, from the employment perspective, retail industry and the consumer businesses employees will be affected from the crisis more. So tourism and services industry are the more critical industries that should be supported, in my opinion.
Thank you. A critical question, I think, about the oil prices. Obviously, these outbreaks affect Turkey in a negative way, like others. But we were, complaining about high oil prices in Turkey that affects, lots of manufacturing plants. But right now, considering the dropped, oil prices in Turkey, what do you think about, the businesses and oil prices relationship?
Yeah.
And what do you foresee? I mean, the oil prices will stay in this level, or is it going to be in an upward shipment again?
Well, I will be going well beyond my expertise if I make an estimate about the oil prices going forward. But I can, I don't want to repeat myself, but the oil prices directly impacts the Turkish construction industry, the energy business and industrial products. So therefore, as long as the oil prices stays at this level, it may be right to expect construction companies perform lower going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, Emre, just a point on that. I mean, oil prices, and I've seen various reports on the effect globally on low oil prices. I mean, they're fine when the world is working normally. Everybody benefits, but the world is not working normally just now. Therefore, whatever industry you're in, manufacturing, whatever, unless you have customers, then you're not going to benefit from low oil prices. Your factories have access to low oil prices, but if their production is not working, they're not going to benefit from them. And again, it depends how long this this pandemic will continue, and whether the glut of oil around the world will continue to build, whereby you will, if things go well, and I'm not sure they will, but that oil prices may stay low for a considerable amount of time. But I mean, when you analyze the oil producers, and Saudi Arabia is already suffering from a big drop in revenues from its oil sales, and it's whether they can hold their nerve going forward before they start putting oil prices up again. So again, it's difficult to predict, as Ali's saying, but just because we've got low oil prices now doesn't mean to say that industry is going to benefit in the way that probably would normally expect it.
Thank you. One last question about textile industry, which is one of the drivers for Turkey. Deniz Hanım is asking, regarding small enterprises, textile industry has also a specific position in Turkey which may affect unemployment rates and the total purchase. Do you have forecast about unemployment rates and the demand shrinking because of it?
Well, Emrah Bey, I don't have it on the top of my head. I agree that the textile industry is another industry which have a huge contribution to the employment. However, in that specific statistics, we can go back and take a look at some statistical data. However, given the shrinking of the Turkish economy, given the consumer behavior, and given the expectations about retail and consumer industry, of course, the textile industry will be impacted, and we may see some decrease in the employment in textile industry as well.
Thank you very much for all. And I think we are coming through the end of the session. We have a couple more questions. We will take it offline and we'll try to respond right after the session. My colleague will copy the link of the presentation onto chat part of this webinar, and also you may be able to find the recording of the webinar and the presentation onto BCCT website shortly. If you have any other question, please email us. And also I would like to remind you to check Deloitte's library in terms of finding sector-specific information, because Deloitte is weekly reporting, weekly preparing some kind of usual sectoral reports, which you can go free online, and it's available for everybody. So you can find specific sector reports or Turkish market reports over there. Any last comments from our speakers?
I'd just like to leave you with
Emrah Bey, we will be more than.
Go on,
I'm so
Ali.
sorry, Chris.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, we will be more than happy to exchange emails. So you can share our email addresses with the participants if you would like to.
Sure. So one other point, to the point for us, we can add the speaker's email address to the slide deck. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, just one thought, to take away. I mean, our respective governments and governments, around the world are all talking about how they can, deal with the impact of the pandemic and the actions that they're actually taking today. I would suggest that governments also need to be also focusing their minds on what they need to do in terms of the post-pandemic situation. So, and we're not hearing much about that. So I would suggest that we put a lot of pressure on our government to actually start thinking about what they need to do in terms of, providing a health service and medical technology that can cope with a pandemic of this order, and also the necessary resources that need to be put in place following the end of this pandemic, in order that we don't suffer the consequences and fatalities that we've experienced to date. As I say, just a message to put pressure on our respective governments to start thinking about the future and what they need to change in order to avoid the current tragedies that we're experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The link for the slide deck is already on the chat tab, so our audience can download the slide deck from there. Please stay tuned with us. So BCCT, we will be doing more sessions on different subjects and industries in the short period of time. Thanks for joining all, and please be safe and sound. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.